You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and I hope wherever you are in the world and whatever you're doing, you are doing very, very well. The bloke that you're about to hear from, his name is Larry LaLonde, and he is the guitarist in a band called Primus. He was the guitarist in a band called The Possessed. You will hear through the chat that I'm a very big fan of both bands. They are touring Australia, that is, Primus are touring Australia. The Possessed aren't, because I think they're still going, but Larry's not in the band. Let me read out some dates for you. They're all through April. Friday the 6th, they're playing Sydney at the Enmore Theatre. Sunday the 8th, they're playing Eaton's Hill Hotel in Brisbane. Wednesday the 11th, the Thebarton, I think it is, Theatre in Adelaide. On Friday the 13th, they're playing Metro City in Perth. And finally, on Sunday the 15th, they're playing the Palais Theatre in Melbourne. Let's hear what Larry has to say. Larry, how are you, mate?
I'm good, man. How you doing?
Oh, plugging away, mate. Plugging away. You know how it is. I've been looking forward to our chat because I've got to say I've genuinely been a fan for... I was trying to count the years, mate, but I got into you guys when I first heard Pork Soda and then worked back and got into the two albums prior to that and, of course, Suck on This as well, the live album. But it's quite a thrill after... I don't know how many interviews I've done now, but it's always a thrill to talk to a man in a band who I've been a fan of for a very long time. So there you go.
Well, that's awfully kind of you. It's nice to talk to someone who is a fan of the music.
Wonderful, mate. Look, I know we've only got a short period of time, so I'll kick things off. Primus are touring Australia in April with Dean from Ween, so I think it's a wonderful matchup. You know, I've already mentioned Frizzle Fry, Sailing the Seas of Cheese, so many classic cuts and fan favourites to choose from. So what sort of show are you guys bringing down to Australia? So, for example, will it focus on the new, the classics, or something else entirely different?
We try to switch it up as much as possible, but, like you said, there's some songs that people always want to hear, like My Name is Mud or Jerry Was a Race Car Driver. We've been playing a lot of the new record, which is, it's not a very long record anyway. It's only like 35 minutes. So, you could easily play all of them and still have tons of time left. But, it'll kind of just be a little bit of everything. Hopefully. That's what we shoot to do, at least.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to pay you a big compliment as well. There's two performances by bands that stand out for me. One was by the Psychedelic Furs in 2006 down here at the Coolangatta Hotel. The other one was in 1998. You played Selena's in Sydney. And, mate, your performance that night was blistering. And now, I don't know whether you remember it, but you were quite sick that night. And I believe you had to be roused from your sick bed in order to play. Does that ring any bells?
Yeah, I totally remember it because I was like, probably our first trip to Australia, and it was like we got there and there was like, it was in Coogee. We're like, wow, this place is amazing, and
that's right.
We went surfing, and I guess that's what got me was someone said, yeah, you probably got something from the water or something, It couldn't have been drinking or anything like that. It's got to be the surfing. So,
absolutely.
I do remember that.
Great. Yeah, and I remember Les said something very interesting. I think it was after the song Is It Luck? He said that was damn near the fastest we've ever played that song. And I remember the roar from the crowd was quite something.
Oh, man. That's awesome you were at that show. Yeah, that was a long time ago. But, yeah, I do remember that show. And that whole experience was so awesome. Because we had no idea. We'd never been to Australia. And that was like our introduction to the whole thing. We were like, wow, this place is awesome.
Wonderful. Yeah, well, we were happy to have you here, mate. But I mentioned Pork Soda as well. So, look, that's an album that really, there's nothing out there quite like it in the mainstream with the exception of some of the albums that Mr. Bungle released. So what are your thoughts on that album now? And can you believe that it's 25 years old?
Wow. You know what? I didn't even know that until you said that. It was that old.
Incredible, yeah.
That's pretty, time flies by, especially, for me, because I'm literally doing the same thing I did 25 years ago. Nothing has really changed. But, we made all of our records have had a totally different way of being made. So that was the one where we were like, we got this record advance and we kind of just went into this warehouse where we, keep all our gear. And we just set up a bunch of like equipment that would, at the time it was like cutting edge gear, but now it's like old digital junk. And it was just a lot of experimenting. And then, we just kept going until we had enough songs. And that's maybe why it's such a bizarre sounding record, because it was quite a bit of an experiment, which all of our albums are. But that one in particular was very, we started from scratch because we've been touring so much before that record. And we really had no time to sit down and work on songs. We just went in and started hammering away.
there are two albums that are cited time over again by musicians, so guitarists, bass players and drummers in particular, and of course that's Sailing the Seas and Frizzle Fry. That period, 1989 to 1991, was a wonderful time for music in general. So there was Jane's Addiction, Faith No More, Fishbone, 24/7 Spies, Mr. Bungle and King's X, all enjoying some degree of success, and that was very overlooked. I don't know whether you'd call it a movement, but before so-called grunge broke big with all of those guitar-based bands, there were some bands that had a wonderful groove that were producing fantastic music that I still listen to this day. But my question for you, mate, is what is it that stands out for you about that era for Primus?
Well, I mean, like you're right, that time there was so much awesome music, and I think for us, everything was new. We just got signed. We just, people started paying attention to us because I think before that, like no one really paid attention on the grand scale of as far as MTV or radio to things that weren't like Whitney Houston or, Phil Collins, or if it weren't that, if it was like Jane's Addiction, it was like, and you didn't really hear about it, but all of a sudden Jane's Addiction in a way kind of changed that because Perry came out with Lollapalooza and everybody sort of, started hearing about this thing, Lollapalooza became a big thing. And all of a sudden there was this big concert where it had all these bands that sort of young people wanted to see, but no one had ever heard of before. So it was kind of, so the record companies, the radio stations, MTV, all of a sudden everyone started paying attention to this weird kind of new music. So it was exciting because, we were really young and we really had no goals other than like, let's make crazy music. But also all of a sudden, we're getting some attention for it, and people were saying like, hey, we'd like to sign you. We'd like to put you up, put it out there, put it on the radio. So that was a pretty exciting time right there because of just all those reasons.
Look, something a lot of people probably don't realise about your good self is, but you're one of the pioneers of death metal and modern heavy metal, really, through your time in the Possessed. So I'd like to dedicate some time talking to you, if that's okay, about your time in the band. Is that cool?
Totally, yeah.
So, look, I interview metal musicians. You're right, you go.
Oh, sorry, what was that?
Oh, look, I interview metal musicians all the time, and when we get talking about influences, so I mentioned earlier, a lot of musicians cite those first two studio albums from Primus as significant influences. Well, I can tell you, mate, heavy metal and death metal guitarists, when we start talking about who's an influence on them as a musician, your name comes up a lot, okay, because of your work in the Possessed, particularly on Seven Churches. So I don't know whether you know that,
really?
mate.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, well, it's the case, mate.
No,
I think
I don't hear about it a lot. Well, the funny thing about it is, like, recently people have been telling me, like, they'll say, oh, you guys invented death metal, and I was kind of like, I don't think so. But then when I kind of think about it, I'm like, yeah, I guess there was nothing actually called death metal before that. There was like black metal and speed metal, but there wasn't really anything called death metal before we had the song death metal. So I was like, I guess maybe we did come up with that.
That's right. Yeah, well, look, I think I got the album on the Combat, Seven Churches on the Combat reissues. I think they came out in about 98 or 99. Okay, so I wasn't a fan from the 80s. I was too young then, but I ended up getting into you guys in 99, I think it was, and I listened to that album back to front many, many times. So, what's your take on your legacy? And I've just mentioned, and I need to pay this, you are a revered heavy metal guitarist, even if you haven't been associated with the genre for well over 30 years. So when you look back on Seven Churches, what's the most prominent memories?
I mean, the whole thing about that was kind of the spirit of everything I've done. It was sort of like trying to just create something new. And that whole kind of music, it was another thing where no one gave it a chance. Everyone's like, there's no way this music's going anywhere. Like, it's about the devil. It sounds crazy. So everyone kind of had this underdog spirit of like, oh, let's see how far we can try to get this out there. And, the Metallica kind of broke, and then, Slayer started getting big. And it was another exciting time where all of a sudden there was this scene that was so underground because of, it was so hardcore. And then it started taking off. So it was exciting. It was another thing where it's like you kind of felt like you were inventing some kind of new music, which, it seems crazy, but that's kind of what we were trying to do, at least. I mean, I was 15 also, so I was
very young.
In high school.
Yeah.
So that added to some of the craziness,
What are your thoughts on Jeff Becerra reforming the band? And I think they've got a new album that's going to be released this year.
Yeah, I keep hearing about that. I haven't talked to him in ages, and every now and then someone will tell me he's doing it, but I haven't seen any of it or heard it or anything. I'd love to check it out.
Yeah, I hope I get a chance to chat to Jeff, actually. He seems like a nice bloke, so it'd be good to sort of talk to him in the same way that I'm having a chat to you about a very important album. And look, it really is. As I said, mate, it's Seven Churches as an album. It'd have to be I mean, I don't like putting labels on things, but it'd be in the top 10 most influential heavy metal albums of all time, really. I mean, you see a ton of particularly 18-year-old girls, for example, wearing Possessed t-shirts. And it's like, how do you get into this stuff? But great.
Really?
Yeah, it made it happen. So I was talking to Blitz from Overkill about the same thing. I see the same thing happen with Overkill T-shirts. And, of course, there's the Motorhead thing as well, where supermodels are wearing Motorhead T-shirts. But, yeah, I mean, it's the enduring influence of great music.
Wow, that's great to hear. I would have never, if you would have told me back then, I would have never thought.
I just want to talk about your musicianship, okay? So my favourite cut that you have contributed guitar to is actually a cover. It's a Pink Floyd song, Have a Cigar. So do you think you'll be pulling that one out in Australia?
Probably not. We haven't played that one in ages, but funny enough, just recently, because every time I get a new phone, somehow it reloads all my library of music on. So that popped up, and I was like, whoa, I haven't heard this in ages. So I was like, So I had probably just heard it for the first time in years, 3 days ago. Yeah, actually, it sounded a lot better than I remembered. So.
Oh, it's a great cut. Les's bass playing is outstanding, as it always is, but you're soloing at the end of that. How did you go about constructing that solo?
I'm a huge David Gilmour fan, as I'm sure every guitar player on the planet is. And so I just tried to go about it to sort of, that everyone can sing that solo in their head. So I tried to play it close to it, but not exactly the same, because, what's the point if you play it exactly the same?
Yep.
That was about it. And the funny thing about a lot of those EPs that we did of full cover songs, the reason we usually did them was because we weren't ready to record an album yet, but we wanted to sort of try out some recording techniques or, try a studio or some new gear. So we would just kind of go in and record all these cover songs, and that's how that one came about. But God, we haven't played that in ages. Well, I'll mention to the guys on the plane over on the way to Australia.
Oh, please do. Yeah, I love that EP, by the way, Miscellaneous Debris. It's one of my favourite releases ever from anybody. So now it's an EP that I put on to this day, and the only thing that I think it was missing was you guys did a cover of NIB. I don't know whether you did it around the same time, the Black Sabbath track, but it was recorded. It sounded like it was recorded in the same sessions. But, man, if that EP had contained the NIB cover as well, that would have been quite something else.
Pardon me, this is the operator. You do have 5 minutes remaining.
Okay, thanks very much. Appreciate that. Mate, a couple more questions. Feedback from Australian fans and listeners through the years. I mean, Primus are a very popular band down here. I know that because I'm a musician and I'm obviously a big fan, but a lot of the people I know that are musicians are big fans too. So do you get a lot of feedback from Australian fans and listeners?
It's hard to say anymore. We definitely used to. Now it's I don't know if it's just the way things are. It's hard to tell where anything's coming from, but I know definitely, as you go around the globe, there's definitely a different reception from different places. And Australia was by far one of the places that that really took to us. And, that's one of the things we noticed when we started off, because it's kind of a struggle when we started. You'd go to different places and they just kind of stare at you like, what is this? And when we came to Australia, people really got it right off. So,
yep.
Yeah,
no, definitely.
Whatever it is, we love it.
Well, I think I know for myself personally, I got into Faith No More first, and there was I don't know whether it was just something that the media did or whether it was something that played a lot of shows together or what have you, but there was always that association between Primus and Faith No More, just from a fan's perspective. So are you still mates with those guys, and is there any chance that you could potentially tour with them?
Man, I would love to. I don't see them as often as I used to. It's funny because, back in the day, we'd hang out every day just because there's nothing else to do. But the last time I saw those guys, we played in, I think, Brazil with them. We did a show, and it was so great to see them. I hadn't seen them in so long, to actually see them play. Jim wasn't in the band anymore, but, yeah, they're such a great band. That would be one of the bands, if I was to make a list of bands to tour with, would definitely be on that list.
Oh, awesome, mate, yeah. All right, mate. It's been a pleasure. It's so rewarding to be able to have a chat to you. You're a good bloke, and thank you so much for answering my questions. And hopefully, mate, I don't know whether it's possible, but I'd love to shake your hand and have a beer with you when you come down to Australia.
Yeah, that would be awesome. Yeah, where are you at? What city are you in?
Queensland, Brisbane.
Cool, man. Well, yeah, let's hopefully find each other. I'd love to meet you.
I'll do the horns from the. I'll be the guy with the Possessed T-shirt on the crowd, mate. You'll be able to spot me fairly easily, I think.
You are listening to the Scars and Guitars podcast. My name is Andrew Mackay-Smith, and that was my discussion with Larry LaLonde, the guitarist in Primus, formerly of The Possessed. Thank you so much for listening.